Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content.
Edith Garrud, very prim and proper at 4 feet 11 inches tall, watches from afar as suffragist leader Emmeline Pankhurst, about to give a speech, steps onto a stage festooned with garlands. Suddenly, 50 tough-looking guys run up, wielding clubs, determined to break up the event and even send some of the participants to prison. In a flash, 24 women, demurely dressed but boldly trained, pull out clubs of their own that they've hidden in their skirts. They swarm the men. The women land some expert kicks, punches, throws. They fend off the invaders. A few of the men do make it to the stage, but realize too late that those festive garlands are actually hiding barbed wire. Edith Garrud nods in approval. England's first female martial arts teacher has taught her students well.
Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here with my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish. Pat, how are things going with you? Is it cooling off in Boston at all recently?
It is.
Okay.
It is cooling off in Boston, yeah.
It was a bit of a heat wave, I think, the last time we talked.
There was. There is now not a heat wave, and I am grateful.
Yes. Well, I have some pretty fun news that I wanted to share with you.
Ooh.
Yeah, I was at the Washington State Summer Con last weekend. I do these comic book shows where I try to sell my books and get people to go check out the podcast and, meet fans, that kind of stuff. And I had a guy come up to me at the show, and he saw my big poster that has the cover of the first Badass book on it. And he was like, "Oh, Ben Thompson, Badass. Is that like Badass of the Week? Is that like the podcast?" And I was like, yeah, we got a podcast now. Have you seen the books? He's like, "No, I didn't know there were books. I didn't know there was a website or anything." And so he was like, "Your podcast just showed up in my feed and I listened to it and I thought it was really great."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he's the first person I've met at one of these events that knew me only through the podcast, which is really cool. That felt great about, we've put so much work into making the show, and it's really cool that it's attracting new people, and that makes me feel really good.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah. So I thought I'd share that with you. And also wanted to say thanks to Corey, was his name. And thanks to Corey for coming out and checking out the show. We're very happy to have new listeners, new fans, as well as all of the people who have been with me for years now. I've had another group that came up and they were like, "We used to read your stuff in college, but now we're all 40 and we have kids and stuff." And it's like, it's strange that Badass is 20 years old and the first book is like 15 years old. So, but it is awesome to be getting new people and having some feedback on the podcast, which is great. If you are a newer fan and you like it, please do, share it with your friends, because it does help us out as we're trying to grow the show. But anyway, just wanted to open with that. So today we have a pretty good show, I think. I feel pretty excited about this one, Pat.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, today we're going to be talking about two women who fought for suffrage and civil rights. And they're two women from two different countries and two wildly different approaches. One is a bit more traditional, and the other a bit different.
Yes, one of them fought for suffrage in the sense of participating in the struggle for women's suffrage, while the one I'm going to talk about, it literally trained women to fight martial arts so that they could beat up people who were trying to break up their protests. So we are going to have a civil rights and a women's rights activist hero, and then we are going to have like a martial arts jujitsu master who also did those things. So it's going to be fun. And so do stick with us. We are going to take a quick break, and we're going to get into the story of Mary Church Terrell and Edith Garrud.
So let me me tell you about Mary Church Terrell. She was born Mary Eliza Church in Memphis, Tennessee on September 23rd, 1863. And I mentioned the date because, dates give you context, and the relevant context here is that her parents were formerly enslaved and now were not enslaved, and they were working their way to becoming successful business people in Memphis. Her mom runs a hair salon in a nice shopping area in the city, and her father's a businessman, and he actually really strikes it big when, unfortunately, yellow fever breaks out in Memphis. It's tragic, but a lot of people leave town, and Bob, Mary's dad, is able to pick up a lot of real estate for a good price.
And one thing to mention here is that we are in 1863, and so formerly enslaved as in a year ago, because in 1863 in Tennessee, Tennessee was a Confederate state. Memphis is taken by the Union pretty early on in the war. The war starts in 61, and then by 63, it's Union held. But this is pretty recent, as in a few months ago even. That's how recently her parents would have been liberated.
Yeah. So, bam, 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 like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, her parents are successful financially, and they're looking around what sort of opportunities are out there, what sort of life do they want to give their daughter, also her brother. And they value education. And so does young Mary, or Molly as she goes by. So they try to figure out what's the best education we can give her. So they send her north because they think she'll encounter fewer racist road bumps up there. So they send her north for the equivalent of middle school and high school. And eventually she attends Oberlin College. She's one of the first African-American women to attend college. And she's looking at Oberlin, good school. She's thinking, what do I want to do with my time at Oberlin? Well, a lot of the female students at Oberlin take a 2-year course known as the ladies' curriculum, and it was a very literary course. That was an option, and certainly Mary could do that. But she had always loved languages. One of their neighbors growing up was from Germany, so she picked up a little bit of German, and she loved Latin and ancient Greek in high school, and she's like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take the 4-year classics course known as the gentleman's course. And there was a little bit of resistance, but she persevered, and she took the 4-year classics course, and she graduated with her classics major. She knew ancient Latin back and forth. She knew ancient Greek back and forth. And
as all badasses do, right, Pat?
Oh, yeah, obviously. And she also manages to have some fun along the way. The women students weren't supposed to dance, but she and a friend found some opportunities to go dancing a little bit, A
little bit of mini footloose action here.
Exactly. Yeah. And then she goes on to teach. And there was a little bit of resistance from her father, because her father, he's really supportive of her, but he's a successful businessman. And, he's got this great life in Memphis. And he's all like, oh, Mary, you don't have to work. Come back to Memphis and live a life of luxury, be a hostess when I give big dinners, And she says no.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like the sort of thing that badass trailblazing would be that excited about. You can host tea parties. It'll be great. All girls like that, right?
Yeah. Now, it is true that there are ways to be badass at tea parties, but they're very subtle ways. And I
think Anne Bonny broke somebody's nose at a tea party once.
There you go. Yeah. She's interested in using her mind. She's interested in helping others. She wants to teach. And she's also very aware, even while she was at Oberlin, that she's a member of several marginalized groups. And so she's aware of, while she's at Oberlin, she goes dancing from time to time, but she tries to be discreet about it because she doesn't want to reflect badly on the category of women at college or the category of African Americans at college. She's very aware of how she's perceived and how she's a representative, a role model. And this is a theme that goes throughout her life.
It's a lot of pressure. It's kind of the Jackie Robinson thing where, like,
yeah,
you know, people were horrible to Jackie Robinson while he was playing. People would yell horrible things at him and write all these death threats and stuff to him. But he would always say that, like, he couldn't react. Like, if he gets angry, and he was kind of a hot-headed guy, gets angry and punches a fan, like, all of a sudden you're completely destroying a much bigger cause than just yourself, right? You're causing a lot of trouble for a lot of people. And, you know, you have to be that much better than you know, because you are representing this group that is generally, you know, people have their preconceived notions about, and you don't want to play into those, right? You want to show that you're, like, bigger. You need to be above everybody else.
Yeah.
So that's tough.
So she teaches, she defies her father. She says, you know, a lot of girls run away from home to get married. I ran away from home to teach. And she gets a job at Wilberforce University, a historically Black college.
Wilberforce is a great name for a school.
It is. Totally is. Yeah.
It's named after a guy named William Wilberforce, who is a British member of Parliament who was, like, largely responsible for emancipation of the slaves in the British Empire.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
So he's so he's kind of a badass too. He was a very active politician who was instrumental in getting slavery abolished in the UK. And Wilberforce University was the first African-American owned college in the United States.
Hey, so there we go.
So there you go.
Yeah. And at Wilberforce, she, not surprisingly, teaches languages. She teaches French. She teaches reading. She teaches writing. French is a little challenging, not because she doesn't know French, because she knows French, but some of the students in her class are actually from Haiti. So they actually come in knowing a lot of French. So she has to work to stay ahead of them and come up with, you know, lessons and stuff. And then also, now, this is something I find very relatable because I've had teaching anxiety dreams like this. So some of my teaching anxiety dreams are, oh, I'm late for class, or, oh, I can't find the classroom. And then from time to time, I have a teaching anxiety dream where I show up and it's for a class that is totally not my field. So in real life, Mary Church Terrell, she doesn't say how this happened, but somehow she wound up teaching a class on mineralogy.
Even though with her classics degree.
Exactly, yeah.
Mineralogy being, like, the study of, like, minerals, like geology?
Yes. She apparently rose to the occasion. She said she literally burned some midnight oil. And she says, how I cudgeled my brain, strained my eyes, and burned it in my memory, trying to learn the stones in mineralogy. And I have to say, she had very good memory, and she sounds like she was very good at reading comprehension. So at the very least, she could, you know, help this. Anyway, somehow it all worked out. And then after that, she went to Washington, D.C. and taught at the colored high school. And then she also takes some time off to study and travel in Europe. And she has all sorts of adventures there. She, in her autobiography, she reports that there was a lot of racism that she was used to from the U.S. that she did not encounter in Europe. You know, there are other challenges. While she's there, she actually receives and turns down several marriage proposals from men in Europe. Huh. Some of them she was actually considering seriously, but then she thinks, no. And what she says is she loves the United States for all of its problems, and she wants to return there. She's having a great time in Europe, but ultimately she wants to go back home.
Has the opportunity to settle down in France or England or somewhere. And
there's this kind of aristocratic guy. She only refers to him as Herr D, but she meets him in Germany, and, like, in some alternate, she actually says, you know, if things had been a little different, maybe she would have, you know, considered him. But she goes back to the U.S. and there in the U.S., she actually does receive a marriage proposal from a guy named Robert Heberton Terrell, whom she actually met through her teaching career. He later goes on to become a judge in the D.C. municipal courts, and he keeps getting reappointed by 4 different presidents. So,
oh wow, so he's kind of a badass, big-time judge.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mention her marriage because it seems like it was a very good match. Two like intellectual powerhouses, both active, in their communities and doing things and very conscious of what they can do for the world. And Mary Church Terrell, okay, like we made jokes about tea parties earlier, and she did not. She chose not to follow the life of a socialite. But I'm kind of picking up on some tea party skills in her autobiography. She makes a point of
she probably was fun at parties.
Oh, I bet she was. Yes, I bet she was. And I think you had to stay on your toes around her. So in her autobiography, she's mentioning, oh yeah, she got married, and she says, oh, I received some beautiful wedding presents, and my goodness, we received a sterling silver cream pitcher from the grandson of Thomas Jefferson. That's a fun little flex right there.
Yeah.
And we also received 6 silver oyster forks. I'm like, oh, well, that's a very elegant wedding present from her childhood friend, Tom Moss. Well, that's very gracious, right?
Mm-hmm.
She uses this as a way to segue into what happened to Tom Moss. About a year after Mary and Robert got married, Tom Moss, who with 2 other guys who were African-American, they were the owners of a grocery store called the People's Grocery in Memphis. And the 3 of them got lynched. And she mentions that. And that was really a defining moment for Mary Church Terrell. It's something that provokes her to move from a teaching career to more of an activism career. Yeah. So a few years later, she's involved in women's suffrage movements. She's invited to speak at the International Congress of Women's Suffrage in Berlin, in Germany. Now, it's true that she spent time in Germany, time in Switzerland. It's true that she knows German. But by 1904, it's been a while since she's had an opportunity to use this language. Oh, okay, whatever. But hey, she gets to go. She's doing activism. She's raising awareness for women's suffrage.
She's giving speeches and teaching and giving lectures and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Writing newspaper articles. She's doing this kind of stuff to like raise awareness for the women's suffrage movement, which is kind of picking up around this time. 1904 is when there's really starting to be a hard push for like women to have the right to vote. And it sounds like she's really involved with, letter writing and campaigning both publicly to raise public awareness, but also writing letters to, I imagine, the powerful, or at least having conversations with the powerful people that she and her husband know in government to try to see if maybe she can change their minds too.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So she's in Berlin. And
for the same purpose, they're doing a big conference there for women's suffrage. So she's going there to give a big speech. She's kind of like a keynote speaker in Germany to talk about why universal suffrage is important and why we should fight for it.
Yeah. So she's in Berlin, and the conference, it's a several-day-long conference. And she's there, and she's, getting to meet people, getting to meet the other delegates. And she mentions several times in her autobiography that her skin is not very dark. And so she never lies about her race. But sometimes in some situations, she lets other people make their own assumptions. So she passes for white from time to time. And apparently that's what was happening at this conference, because people were coming up to her and saying, oh, hey, we heard that there was going to be a Black delegate from America. Do you know where she is? We would like to meet her. And she lets that kind of just happen for a little bit. And she's, chatting with the other delegates, networking or whatever. And she realizes that some of the German women attending this conference were complaining a little bit about a previous conference held in Germany where the delegates from England and the United States were making their speeches all in English. And they were still doing this at this conference.
Which is a pretty common thing, right? You travel there, you speak English. And, even today, you travel somewhere in the world, and maybe even more so today, you travel somewhere in the world and you just kind of expect everybody to speak English, and largely that happens. But it's a thing that we as Americans take for granted, is that like learning a second language is not necessarily a requirement whereas it is in certain other countries. My wife is from Brazil, and they learn English there. And then if they travel to France, they speak English with the French people, that kind of thing, because it's kind of a universal language that you should know to talk to people in other countries. But that is one thing that I imagine is probably frustrating if you're in Germany and you're German and you have to know English to understand what's happening in this conference happening in your own hometown.
Exactly. Yeah. So she's scheduled to give her speech on Monday. It's Saturday. And she's done a little bit of thinking about this. She actually asks advice from another American there whom she knows well. And she's thinking, you know what? I'm going to translate my speech into German and I'm going to deliver it in German. So she's got 2 days to do this. Okay. And so she's staying at this suite and she tells the maid not to let anyone in, no disturbances, no interruptions. And she's once again burning the midnight oil. She says she got like 3 hours of sleep each night. I don't know. Maybe she was exaggerating. Maybe, I don't know,
Some people just don't need a lot of sleep, especially like super high functioning people. You hear this sometimes, they'll be like, you see the daily schedules of various like geniuses from history and they do only sleep 3 hours a night. It probably helps.
So, yeah, she's said that she's always had a lot of stamina and a lot of energy, like even for things like going to art museums. She lasts a lot longer than the other people. Okay, so this is Mary Church Terrell. She's got the know-how. She's got the energy somehow. Maybe she's got coffee. I don't know. And so she just plugs away. And these are the days before Google Translate. So she's just plugging away, drafting her speech. And she maybe goes out for something and then she comes back and wait a minute, she told the maid not to let anyone in. So who is this strange man in her living room? She never actually explains in her autobiography exactly how the guy got in. I guess the maid let him in, or I have no idea. So he's a reporter from an Austrian newspaper. She's like, okay, what's going on here? And they start talking. And I'm sure she's being very gracious, but also deciding if she needs to set a boundary, she'll set a boundary. But they get talking. And then the reporter says, oh, Mrs. Terrell or Frau Terrell or whatever. I don't know if they're speaking in English or German at this point. I see you have written this speech in German and it is very good. However, I have noticed a few errors. She gets the reporter to proofread her speech in German. And he goes through and proofreads it and fixes the few little errors. And he even suggests some more up-to-date language, because remember, she hadn't been in Germany for, several years. So she's got this speech that she translated herself, but now she's super confident about the German because this Austrian reporter, copy edited for her. And she spends the next however many hours until the day that she's supposed to give her speech, that Monday, memorizing it. And she just becomes the speech. She and the speech become one. And it's Monday. She gets into the place where she's giving the speech. It's actually the Philharmonic. So this is not just like a few dozen people in a random hotel room. This is a big venue, She's got a big audience.
Yeah, like an auditorium. And she has spent 3 days because somebody was annoyed on Friday. She was doing that. She's got to beat them. So she translates her entire speech into German and memorizes it in German, which is a language she doesn't really speak. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so she gets up and she delivers the speech. And also remember that she's been letting people at the conference assume that she's white. So she gets up and she opens the speech by saying, up until very recently, the daughter of someone like me would not be here. I'd be toiling in the fields. And now, slavery is over and I'm here and I can do this. And then she goes to talk about just women's suffrage in general. So that was her reveal, like, hey, I'm actually Black. I'm actually African American. Mm-hmm. And she makes the speech and the audience loves it. They applaud when she's done. They applaud for minutes.
Wow. Standing ovation.
Yeah.
So she didn't. So this is a step above like Ich bin ein Berliner, which is not
Yes.
grammatically accurate.
Yes. Yeah. So she got a lot of applause. And more importantly, she also raised a lot of awareness. And she got requests from like newspapers all over the place for copies of the speech, et cetera, et cetera. That was Mary Church Terrell, just Mary Church Terrelling all over the place.
This is a very Pat badass because she's a classicist who had to teach mineralogy and succeeded, and then had to translate her talk into a foreign language at the last minute to deliver it in front of an auditorium and succeeded.
Yeah. So
yes. What happens with the speech? What happens for her career after this?
Yeah, she continues with the activism. She continues with making speeches, with writing letters. She also organizes. She's involved with and also helps to found a lot of different organizations. She's still involved in education specifically, but at the level of the District of Columbia School Board. And there she does lots of important school board things. She sticks up for teachers who some people wanted to get fired for unfair reasons. She institutes Frederick Douglass Day, which is February 14th. And she did that specifically because she was thinking of the African-American kids in the school district. She's thinking about representation. She's thinking about role models. She wants kids to grow up knowing that there are people like Frederick Douglass out there. And also, by example, Mary Church Terrell.
Right. And Frederick Douglass, we've talked about on this show when we had A.J. Jacobs come and talk about constitutional badasses. So we kind of get into him then.
And also, not necessarily as an activism thing, but just as a thing, she got the school district an extra vacation day for Easter, because I guess they didn't have off for Easter. And she thought, well, everyone wants to have a little bit of time off around Easter. Maybe your family celebrates Easter. Even if your family doesn't celebrate Easter, by that time in the semester, we need a break. That's me speaking. So
right, because it's on a Sunday, so you never have school. You don't have school on Sunday, so you get the Friday or the Monday or something, so you can at least travel to see your family.
Exactly. Yeah. And in 1909, she becomes a charter member of NAACP. She's invited to speak like everywhere. In 1919, she's back in Europe, in Zurich for the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And that's basically her life. And in 1940, how old is she in 1940? She's almost in her 70s. She's publishing her autobiography. And she calls it A Colored Woman in a White World. And that's where I'm getting a lot of this information from. And she's still active all the way until the end. In her mid-80s, in 1950,
wow,
she's involved in kind of a little protest. Someone she knew had figured out that there were some anti-segregation laws on the books for the city of DC that dated back to 1872 and 1873. And technically, these laws are on the books for decades. And so Mary Church Terrell and two other African Americans decide to go to a restaurant where they specifically wanted to test out these laws. It's called Thompson's Restaurant. They go there. They try to get served lunch.
No relation, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Oops, sorry. Yeah. Whoops. Yeah. And they were refused. So they complained to the city, and they persuaded the city of DC to sue Thompson's Restaurant. The case eventually went to the Supreme Court, and these anti-segregation laws were ultimately upheld. And that's what she was doing in her 80s.
Still
going out
like
for lunch.
And so by upheld, you mean like the
Supreme Court supported the anti-segregation laws.
Great. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So that's, that's great. So kind of still in her 80s out there, like fighting for civil rights, fighting for, she's a women's suffrage supporter. And that ends up happening in, I believe, 1919 in the U.S. Is universal suffrage. But even beyond that, even into the 50s, she is continuing the struggle for civil rights, which never really ends. And so that's pretty amazing. Kind of never giving up and having two serious struggles that she's like a central part in, being a founding member of the NAACP, and also like an active women's suffrage proponent, like giving speeches internationally on it. That's pretty badass.
And she's got a good international perspective also. And Ben, earlier in the episode, we were saying, okay, we've got two different women, two very different approaches, two different countries. In 1920, Mary Church Terrell attended a speech by a woman from England, the daughter of the Bishop of Canterbury. I don't have her name. But she, Mary, reports in her autobiography that this woman she was very ethereal and fragile, but she began her speech by saying, quote, "How many of you in this room have ever been arrested for the sake of suffrage? Will those of you who have been please raise your hands?" And Mary Church Terrell writes that the speaker looked as though she confidently expected to see several hands go up at least, but not a hand was raised. And the speaker goes on to say, with keen disappointment, "Why, if I were to ask English women such a question in an audience like this, at least half a dozen hands would be raised."
So, yeah, that's what we're going to get into with Edith Garrud. She is going to be, Mary Church Terrell is highly educated, highly competent, excellent public speaker, very, very motivated, very competent, very capable, works extremely hard for her entire life for the cause of suffrage and civil rights, and shows a lot of bravery, shows a lot of aptitude, and is just an amazing person. Edith Garrud, who I'm going to talk about after this break, well, you know what? I'll let her describe her approach towards the fight for universal suffrage. She says, "Physical force seems to be the only thing in which women have not demonstrated their equality to men. And whilst we are waiting for the evolution, which is slowly taking place and bringing about that equality, we might as well just take time by the forelock and use jitsu." That is Edith Garrud's approach to women's suffrage. And there's going to be a lot of physical confrontations and flipping and punching and arrests. So when we get back from this break, we are going to see the other side of this struggle, and one that involves a lot more punching and hitting people with sticks and getting arrested. Stick with us. So it's not just that Edith Garrud is perhaps the first female martial arts instructor in the Western world, and possibly one of its first martial arts film stars. It's not just that she was 4'11" and in a hoop skirt with a big floppy hat and like judo flipping police for TV and film and magazines, teaching women how to overcome people who are twice their size, teaching martial arts. She's one of the first fight choreographers in British film history. She ends up training in a cadre of women in martial arts at a time when most women were it was not common for women to be able to judo flip guys twice their size. The thing, it's not just that she was this martial arts instructor and action hero. It is that these people that she is training in martial arts end up kind of on the front lines of a literal physical confrontation battle for women's suffrage during the years leading up to women's suffrage in the UK. So
they're smashing patriarchy, not just in a figurative sense.
Right. They're smashing all kinds of stuff. There's going to be a lot of smashing happening here. Okay. Edith Margaret Williams was born in Somerset, England in 1872. So she's a bit younger than a few years after Mary Church Terrell. She moves to Wales not too long after when she's just a young girl. And eventually she grows up. She meets this guy named William Garrud when she's in her teenage years. William Garrud is this kind of big strapping boxer, wrestler, like martial arts guy. He teaches a course on jujitsu. He wrote a book about it. And his job was that he would like train athletes in Wales, not just like physical fitness, push-ups, pull-ups, running, but also in jujitsu and fighting and boxing. Edith likes this guy for obvious reasons, you think. And they start dating. They eventually get married, and he is kind of brings her into his club of like, let's learn how to fight. Let's run. Let's do, 2-finger push-ups. I don't know. And all that kinds of, wrist locks and hip tosses and martial arts. So she starts training, I believe at age like 14. So she starts training in martial arts and she loves it. She's like obsessed with it and she wants to do it all the time. So this guy, William Garrud, he knows other people in the field, right? He knows other martial arts instructors. And one of his good buddies is somebody named William Barton Wright. Barton Wright is a gym coach, but he's also the inventor of a martial arts style known as Bartitsu. Or Bartitsu. Yeah, Bartitsu.
Okay.
So Bartitsu is the martial art that Sherlock Holmes practices. It's a mix between like stick fighting, bare knuckle boxing, French savate, and jujitsu. So, anytime you see pictures of those guys that are wearing like that 1920s style hat and they're fighting with a cane, like cane fighting, because people would just walk around with canes at this time period. They wore nice hats and they wore suits outside and they walked with a cane. And Bartitsu was the art of beating bad guys up with your cane. So she's learning that from the guy who invented it. That's going pretty well. She relocates to London at some point, and she starts studying jujitsu with a guy named Sadakazu Uenishi, who is the first jujitsu. He's a Japanese jujitsu master. He's the first jujitsu master to ever teach students outside of Japan. Yeah, he's this very famous like martial artist at the time. And, these guys have been studying a few different styles and fighting styles, and now they are training with Uenishi, who is just kind of the only place to go. The only new information you can learn is going to be from one of these martial arts masters who is like really this style has never left Japan. Okay. So she becomes a master of this as well. Like I said, she's pretty short. She's not 5 feet tall. And she starts doing these demonstrations. I think of La Maupin doing the fighting demonstrations. Edith Garrud starts doing fighting demonstrations in public where she will get somebody from the crowd, or she will take her husband and just flip him. And she does this while she's wearing the big hoop skirt with the big hat, and she looks like Downton Abbey, but she's like putting dudes in wrist locks and being like, "This is how you'd break their arm. You could just put a little bit of pressure here, and you can dislocate their shoulder," which is great.
Yeah. So she doesn't look like your stereotypical martial arts student in that she's not wearing a typical martial arts outfit. She's wearing stuff that a woman might wear to go out shopping or go to a tea party in. Right, exactly. This is another badass tea party callback, right? And she looks like she's dressed for something like a Downton Abbey, but in reality, she's flipping people. And and they're teaching this to men and women. And, this is a thing of like how, if you streets are dangerous at night, and it's pretty cool to be training women to flip guys who are trying to attack them in the street at night. Cool. That's something that she feels strongly about, and she's very good at it. Yeah. And she's 4'11", right. So she's really got to work on some techniques for dealing with people who are bigger than her. Right. Using their strength and momentum against them is a big component of jiu-jitsu and judo, and she's good at it. And so in 1907, she's 35 years old. She's been training for, almost 2 decades at this point. And Mrs. Garrud, she stars in the United Kingdom's first martial arts film. There's a silent movie called Jiu-Jitsu Takes Down the Footpads. Footpad being a reference to a thief or a hoodlum or something. And some guy tries to steal her purse and she flips him, apparently, or just goes totally Jackie Chan on him, which is cool. I was not able to find this video. I looked for it. I wasn't able to find it on YouTube, although I did find a great YouTube video called Self-Defense Tutorial from 1933
British Pathé is the name of the video. And it shows this very, very pleasant looking English woman in fancy clothes. And she is giving a demonstration for a newsreel on how to flip people. And there's some guy like twice her size. And she's, she's dressed like she's dressed for a tea party. And they would train like that because that's the clothing you're going to be wearing. If you're in a self-defense situation, you want to be wearing, you're not going to be in a martial arts gi. You're going to be wearing this dress. So you need to learn how to fight in it, right?
Yeah. You're going to have your purse. And and you showed me that video, Ben, and it's actually, she's very demure in some ways. Like I'm thinking of Annie Oakley. She's got her purse and she says, she narrates what she's doing. She's like, oh, he's coming after my purse. So I'm going to hold my purse like this. And then I'm going to grab his arm like this. And in a much more prim voice than I'm doing right now.
Right. A real posh
really
English voice. It's great. And the guy is twice her weight, and she flips him. And then when she's done with the demonstration, she flips him like 5 or 6 times. And then from this position, you can flip him like this. And then she does like a back throw, like she goes onto her back and kicks him over. Like it's cool. And then at the end of the demonstration, she opens the purse and like powders her nose or whatever, like touches up her makeup. It's great. That's Edith Garrud, and that's the type of women that she's teaching here.
Even if all she's doing is teaching martial arts, that's pretty badass in that time and place.
It's pretty badass. Yeah, 1907, teaching women to fight. I mean, that's great, right? She's doing a good service and helping people out. Physical fitness, self-defense. There's a lot of great things about martial arts, and it's pretty badass that this woman is able to basically flip and beat up people who are way, way, way bigger than her. That skill comes into play in 1908 when a woman named Emmeline Pankhurst comes to Edith Garrud's martial arts studio and asks for help. So Emmeline Pankhurst is kind of like, she at the time is the leader of the Women's Social and Political Union, which is a group that is fighting very hard for women's suffrage in the UK. Women around this time, they thought, hey, it might be cool if we were allowed to like vote, inherit land, ask for a divorce, buy property, have some kind of legal precedent that like prevents us from having to go to work at 8 years old. That would be awesome if we could get some kind of rights at all. And so women at this time were protesting like, hey, we should get the right to vote and participate in government and be treated like regular human beings like everybody else. And some people didn't like that idea. And so what happened was that police and other men would come and beat these women up. Yes. And break their signs and throw them away and tell them to go back home or whatever. Just put them in jail. If they went on hunger strikes, they would get force fed. If they were protesting in places, the police would just come beat them up with sticks. Emmeline Pankhurst, she's kind of the Susan B. Anthony of England. If Susan B. Anthony was like significantly more violent and like urged her followers to smash the windows of police stations and throw Molotov cocktails into businesses and stuff like that. But Emmeline Pankhurst is, maybe she's like the Malcolm X of women's suffrage. She's like kind of any means necessary, right? She's whatever we have to do, we're going to do it. And Emmeline Pankhurst has been on the front lines of a lot of this. She's getting beat up. She's getting thrown in jail. She would get thrown in jail and then go on a hunger strike. And even if they would force feed her, she would eventually resist it enough that people would be worried she's going to die in prison. And at some point they'd have to release her because she's going to die, because she's going to starve herself to death. And then as soon as she got out, she'd go right back to what she was doing before. That's a pretty badass determination right there. But this is not a sustainable platform. So she goes to Edith Garrud and she's like, I need women that can fight. I need you to send me some women that can fight, that can help me.
And I'm guessing Edith Garrud says, oh, why, yes, I can help you.
I can teach you this. Yes. So what Edith Garrud does, so she does not go out there and fight cops. And I'm not saying that like beating up police officers is badass. I'm not encouraging people to get into fights with police.
Bad idea. Yeah.
Right. But and Edith Garrud doesn't do that. So she is kind of valuable to the movement in that she needs to keep her nose clean. If she goes to jail, it's going to be a big problem for training women to protest and stuff.
They need her in the classroom, in the dojo, or whatever you call a jujitsu place.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
So what she does is she stays in her dojo and she starts training women in martial arts so that they can fight to defend Emmeline Pankhurst during her speeches and protests. So these women, they call them the jujitsu suffragettes or jujitsu suffragists. And she trains like 30 women who... So,
Ben, they call themselves the jujitsu suffragettes.
Right.
But these days, we're supposed to call them suffragists.
Yeah, the term today is suffragist because suffragette, I mean, you might know more than me, but it's like I think it's a diminutive.
Yeah, it's a diminutive and sounds kind of patronizing these days. But I guess in those days, maybe they wanted an ending that sounded feminine. And these days we're just like, no, we just use the ist ending because we don't need any of that. Got it. We don't want to make it sound like we're like patting them on the head and saying, oh, how cute. Oh, look at these little suffragettes. We're calling them suffragists because they're proponents of a particular movement.
Right.
And they call themselves the jujitsu suffragettes, and I'm sure they probably had many conversations about that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Yeah. So that is, but regardless, we have jujitsu women. We have these 30 women who are being called in to be basically the bodyguard for Emmeline Pankhurst. And these women would go out there. Pankhurst would go to give a speech or perform some kind of sit-in, some kind of public demonstration to raise awareness and try to fight for women's right to vote. And these cops, and as I read in one thing, quote, unpleasant young men that were opposed to the idea.
That's a very Tea Party way of saying it.
It's a very Tea Party way of describing like guys who have been said to like rough up women who want to vote. And so the bodyguard was these 30 women, and they were dressed like what we've been talking about in these, you know, these nice dresses with the big hats. Like they look like women from the 1910s, 1920s, right? That is what they are dressed as. And but underneath those nice dresses, they have wrapped their midsections with layers of, they're wearing heavy dresses, and they wrap their midsections with heavy, with rolls of cardboard to try to act as armor. Because the cops aren't just punching and kicking them, they're hitting them with clubs, billy clubs and stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so you got to protect your ribs and your midsection and all your vital organs. So they're wearing armor underneath, they're wearing body armor underneath that they've made themselves out of cardboard.
Wow, 3 inches of cardboard, like 3 inches deep?
Yeah, 3 inches thick.
Whoa.
Cardboard is wrapped multiple times to try to soften a blow. And under those same dresses, and under those same dresses, they're also packing Indian clubs, which is it looks like a bowling pin. It's a club that looks like picture a bowling pin. And they're packing those so that they can fight back if they have to.
Yeah. Try hiding one of those under a traditional martial arts uniform.
There you go.
Like maybe these big dresses are good for stealth reasons. Yeah,
there you go. It's smuggling things in and out. So the fighting style ends up being called suffragitsu. And suffragitsu. And this bodyguard are referred to as Mrs. Pankhurst's Amazons. We've talked about the Amazons before.
But of course.
Yes.
Okay.
And she starts doing
Pankhurst's Amazons.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they start doing speeches. She starts doing speeches and demonstrations, and the cops come, and these unpleasant young men come, and they go to attack Pankhurst or arrest her, and suddenly they're confronted by 30 women who are fighting back with clubs and who know martial arts and are flipping people and brawling. They're just brawling in the street. Like that's the fight for women's suffrage in the UK at this time is like involves this, right? Literally a fight for suffrage.
Yeah.
There is a great speech from Emmeline Pankhurst when she is at one of these talks where the cops are kind of surrounding the building, and she's giving this talk to a group of people who are activists. And she says, "I have reached London tonight in spite of armies of police. I am here tonight and not a man is going to protect me because this is a woman's fight and we are going to protect ourselves. I'm coming out amongst you in a few minutes and I challenge the government to arrest me." And when she comes out, she's got those 30 bodyguards with her and they're looking for a fight, which is
And this is making me think of the Mary Poppins movie, which I think when I was, well, no, seriously, like when I was young, I think there was some parts of it that went over my head. And
like I missed the part where Mary Poppins whipped out a bowling pin and clubbed somebody with it.
Well, okay, this is, she's practically perfect in every way, but I don't remember a bowling pin. But Mrs. Banks, the mom of the kids, she was out carrying signs and protesting. And there's a song that she sings. I'm not going to try singing it, but some of the lyrics are, "Take heart, for Mrs. Pankhurst has been clapped in irons again. No more the meek and mild subservience we. We're fighting for our rights militantly."
Oh, that's right.
And it's, and then that just kind of, and then we move on to, cleaning up the nursery and hanging out with Dick Van Dyke and whatever. But that's the background for Mary Poppins. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. I don't think I realized that. I wouldn't mess with Julia.
Yeah.
She was the big sea monster in the Aquaman movie.
Oh, yeah. She's got range.
She's got range, yeah.
And also, you mentioned Sherlock Holmes earlier, and there are the two Enola Holmes movies about a made-up younger sister played by Millie Bobby Brown. And in the second Enola Holmes movie that came out just a few years ago, it's been a while, but she and her mother, played by Helena Bonham Carter, learn martial arts. And the person who teaches Enola martial arts is a totally fictional character, but she's named Edith.
Yeah. And then that's what she learns. She learns jujitsu and bartitsu and the Sherlock Holmes martial art and the Edith Garrud martial art. So yeah, it's badass. It's still badass today.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, in movies, you get some good fight scenes.
Yeah.
And I don't remember any jujitsu in Mary Poppins, but in the Enola Holmes movies, you do get some pretty good action scenes.
That's true. All the Sherlock Holmes stuff does a pretty good job with that. And, but yeah, so that is Edith Garrud, and this bodyguard that she's training, they have to meet in attics and basements, and they have to take weird circuitous routes to and from wherever they're going, so that because they're being followed by cops and other people who are trying to get their identities. They're wearing disguises. They're trying to throw the police off Emmeline Pankhurst's trail, and they also get out there and they fight with them a few times. There was one time that Pankhurst was giving a talk at a town hall meeting, and these 50 cops, like a huge number of police, come in there to break it up. They've got clubs and they're ready to fight. And the Pankhurst has 25 women with her, and these cops go to rush the stage, which is decorated with flowers and garlands and all of this kind of picture, like any kind of election from this time period where they have like rows of flowers and that kind of stuff. Well, the Amazons have it's not just decorative. The Amazons have hung all of that bunting over top of barbed wire. So when the cops run into it, they run into the barbed wire.
That's sneaky.
Yes, and it actually because they you can't really go over it or around it. Like it funnels them into a choke point where these 25 women can hold off the cops or at least fight them and give Pankhurst a chance to escape, which she does. And there's another time where they were trying to get Pankhurst to a talk, and the cops found them and attacked them, and they're fighting. It's like a dozen cops, and they're fighting I don't know how many of the Amazons. There's a battle. The cops eventually win. They knock out Pankhurst and start dragging her away, only to find that it's not her, it's a body double.
Oh, a decoy.
Yes. So I mean, this is violent. This is a violent story.
And just violent, and also they've put a lot of thought into this.
Yeah. They're doing all kinds of they're fighting a guerrilla war here, basically.
They are.
What it seems like. So, like we said, Edith Garrud, she's not involved in these frays herself, which is kind of nice because I feel more confident being like she's pretty badass, but she also hasn't beaten up a lot of police officers, which is something that I feel like could be a little bit of a weird thing to seem to glorify. But also, she would make these videos, and she made films and newsreels, and she's appeared in some magazines doing with photographs, doing demonstrations of things. And her husband, who is also a martial artist, he would dress up like a cop, and she would do like a step-by-step magazine article with like 5 or 6 pictures in a row on like, here's how to get the lock, here's how you turn them, here's how you flip them, put that in the newspaper or the magazine, and then be like, women's suffrage is important. Here's how you can defend yourself if you're talking about wanting to vote and somebody wants to beat you up because of that, which is cool. And so they're doing this. There's this struggle. The struggle calms down a bit in 1914 when World War I starts. Everybody kind of is organized against, like, let's fight the Germans instead of beat each other up. But the speeches continue and the talks continue. The public sentiment continues to push for women's right to vote. And in 1918, Parliament passes an act that allows women to vote. At the time, the first version of the women's right to vote says that it had to be women over 30 could vote and men over 21 could vote, which is kind of a weird thing.
But a lot of the young men were away fighting, right?
Away fighting or dying, right? Like the population is much lower in England by the end of World War I than it was at the beginning. And so they didn't want men to be outnumbered by women in voters. So they did that. They eventually lower it a few years later to 21 for everybody.
So what does she do? I mean, it seems like that's a big goal that's been achieved.
Yeah. 8 million British women gained the right to vote, which that's a big deal. And they've been fighting for it literally for a long time. And so Edith Garrud, I mean, she continues on her career as a martial arts instructor, right? This was kind of a fun, I don't know if fun's the right word, but this was kind of a thing that she is known for, is training these jujitsu suffragists. But she is a martial arts instructor. She continues to run her dojo. She teaches women to fight. She teaches women self-defense techniques to defend themselves against muggings and things of that nature.
Purse snatchings,
purse snatchings, all kinds of things. And so she keeps writing magazine articles. She keeps teaching. She runs the women athletes branch of the Women's Freedom League. And then later on, she starts teaching jujitsu to London police officers. They come to her.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
She what?
Yes. The police of the greater London area are like, okay, can you teach us how you do that? Because that was crazy, that what they were doing to us. Like, can you teach us some tricks? And now that she's convinced that they're not going to use that knowledge to beat up her friends, she's like, sure, I'll teach cops. I don't care. Like, I don't have anything against it. So she starts teaching jujitsu to the London Police Department. And she also starts working as a fight choreographer for stage performances, like plays, and also for film. So
that sounds like fun.
Yeah. If there's a woman that's going to be fighting in a movie or a man going to be fighting in a movie or a stage performance, they'll call her in. She'll do the choreography for it. And she's like the badass martial arts instructor, and is that way until she lives to be 99 years old, and she teaches martial arts as long as she possibly can stand. She dies in 1971 at the age of 99.
Oh, wow. Okay, there's a secret to longevity right there, I assume.
Yeah, jujitsu.
Jujitsu, stick up for your beliefs, do jujitsu. Yeah.
And, one thing I love is in one of her final interviews, she's 93 and she's getting interviewed by this famous reporter in England at the time, and she demonstrates a wrist lock technique on him. She's 93 years old, and there's a picture of her like demonstrating the wrist lock technique on him, and then she also gives him the recipe for her recipe for birthday cake, because it was just her birthday. And so she gives him a recipe. So that's kind of Edith Garrud. She looks like a nice little old British grandma, but she'll flip you for
cake.
Yeah, but she'll flip you for real. Yeah.
Cool.
And she passed away in 1971. In June of 2012, she got a plaque outside, those plaques that they do in England.
The blue plaques.
Yeah, she gets one at her old home in the London borough of Islington. And it says, Edith Garrud, the suffragette that knew jujitsu, lived here, which is a great little way to be remembered.
That
is a plaque you would walk by, and if you didn't know the story, you'd be like, okay, I got to know more about that.
Yes.
That's it. We have two badass women who had two radically different approaches to fighting for their rights, both of which were successful, and both of which were commendable and badass.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Pat, I feel good about that.
And we've got both brain and brawn represented.
Yes, absolutely. Well, they flexed various muscles in different ways, but but both successfully, and in cause of a thing that I feel like is a very noble cause. So
yeah.
All right, well, that is
okay.
Badass Suffragists. Thank you guys so much for listening. And like we said at the beginning, thank you to all of the new listeners and the longtime fans. We appreciate all of you so much. You're amazing. And because of you guys and girls, I use guys as a non-gender specific term.
Yeah, I'm from the Northeast. When I was growing up, my mom would sometimes refer to my sister and me as, hey, could you guys come help us in the kitchen or whatever.
Yeah.
So I hear guys, and part of me thinks it's a specific gender, and part of me is like, yeah, it's just the pronoun.
I use guys to refer to multiple humans. I use it to refer to multiple, like my cats, like my two cats, they're guys. Pulling dishes out of the dishwasher. Got to get these guys put away, you know? I just use, but anyway.
Dishes are people too.
Yes. So everybody, all creatures of the earth,
yes,
please continue
all
to listen.
Listeners.
Yes, continue listening to our podcast, and thank you for doing so. We will see you on the next episode.
Stay badass.
Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are me, Ben Thompson, Dr. Patricia Larish, and Andrew Jacobs. Writing is by me and Pat. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Mixing and music and sound design by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeartRadio. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and tell your enemies. And please leave us a rating. We'll be back next week with another one.